before the gods set the stars in their courses, before the Euphrates knew its banks, there was a king in Uruk who had forgotten he could die. Gilgamesh, 2 parts divine and 1 part dust, ground his people beneath his heel like barley beneath the millstone, and the gods in their heaven heard the city's bitter prayers. So they reached down into the wild places beyond the cedar forests and made an answer from clay and spit, an animal fury. They shaped Enkidu in the image of what Gilgamesh had been before kingship corrupted him. Strength enough to wrestle lions, innocence enough to know nothing of shame. The goddess Aruru kneaded mud between her divine fingers and breathed into it the breath of storms, and where her creation fell to earth, the grass grew thick, and the gazelles came to drink beside him without fear. He knew no speech but the language of wind through grass. He knew no home but the sprawling darkness between the stars and the trampled earth where he slept among the herds. For 7 years, Enkidu ran with the wild things. His hair grew long as a woman's, matted with burrs and dust. His body hardened under the pitiless sun. He tore away the hunter's snares with hands that had never known the weight of a tool. He filled in the pits dug for wolves. He was the wild itself, given form and fury, and the hunters of Uruk grew lean while their king grew fat on the fruit of their diminishing work. A hunter came before Gilgamesh with a face gray as ash. He spoke of the wild man who destroyed his traps, who ran with the beasts and guarded them as fiercely as a mother guards her young. Gilgamesh listened from his throne of cedar and lapis lazuli, and something ancient stirred in his chest, something that remembered what it was to be more than a king grinding his people beneath his endless appetites. "Send Shamhat," he commanded. "Send the temple priestess. Let her teach the beast what it means to be human." They found Enkidu at the watering hole, where the gazelles came at dawn. Shamhat wore nothing but the sacred oils of Inanna's temple and the lapis beads at her throat that caught the early light like captured pieces of heaven. For 6 days and 7 nights she remained with him at the water's edge. She spoke to him in words he did not understand, her voice soft as rain on dust. She offered him bread, the first bread he had ever seen, round and marked with the sacred symbols of civilization. She touched his wild face with perfumed hands. On the 7th day, Enkidu reached for the bread. The gazelles scattered at his movement. When he called out to them in their language, they did not return. He called again, his voice cracking like old leather, but they were gone into the shimmer of heat and distance. The beasts he had run with, the herds he had protected, wanted nothing of him now. He smelled of human oil and human bread, and they knew him for a stranger. Shamat dressed him in cloth that scratched against his skin. She combed the matted tangles from his hair. She taught him words: sky, water, bread, death. Each word was a small death of its own, a narrowing of the infinite wildness into the sharp points of meaning. By the time they reached Uruk, Enkidu walked upright like a man, though his eyes still held the horizontal gaze of prey animals, watching for predators at the edge of sight. The city rose before them like a mountain of human will made solid, mud brick upon mud brick, the great ziggurat climbing toward heaven in measured steps, each level a prayer and a boast. The streets ran thick with people, more people than Enkidu had known existed in all the world. The air stank of humanity, of waste and perfume and cooking meat and the sharp bite of bronze being worked in the smithies. Above it all rose the palace where Gilgamesh held court, wrapped in the sacred regalia of kingship, distant and terrible as a star. They met in the street when Gilgamesh came down from his palace to claim another bride for her wedding night, as was his right as king. Enkidu stood in his path, the wild man and the civilized king, mirror images of what the other might have been. They grappled there in the dust between the mud brick walls, strength against strength, fury against fury. The ground shook, doorposts trembled. The watching crowd fell back in terror and wonder as the two men struggled like gods at the dawn of creation, neither giving ground. When at last they broke apart, both bleeding, both gasping, they looked at each other and saw what the gods had intended them to see. Themselves. Gilgamesh embraced Enkidu as a brother. The wild man wept, though he did not know why, and the king, who had forgotten mortality, remembered it again in the presence of someone he could love. They became as one person in two bodies. They hunted together in the wild places Enkidu still remembered. They walked together through the streets of Uruk, where Gilgamesh was learning to be a king who served rather than devoured. And when they grew restless with peace, they traveled to the cedar forest of Lebanon and cut down the sacred trees, killing the demon Humbaba who guarded them, bringing back wood for the temple doors. It was glory. It was brotherhood. It was hubris. Inanna saw the king's return in triumph and desired Gilgamesh for her own. When he refused her, remembering the fate of her previous lovers, turned to broken things and discarded, the goddess shrieked her rage to heaven. She demanded the bull of heaven from her father Anu, demanded he send it down to Gore and trample Uruk into dust. The bull descended like a falling star. Its hooves were each as wide as a man was tall. Its breath withered crops. When it snorted, the earth cracked open and swallowed 100 men. When it bellowed, women miscarried in their homes, and the ziggurat trembled to its foundations. Enkidu and Gilgamesh faced it together in the great square before the temple. The wild man remembered his strength from before words, from before bread and oil and the narrow meanings of civilization. He seized the bull by its horns, those horns that symbolized all divine power, the crescent moon, the plenty of the harvest. He held it while Gilgamesh drove his sword between its shoulders, down through the great heart, until the beast fell like a mountain falling, and the earth shook with its dying. They tore out its heart and offered it to Shamash, the sun god. They cut away its haunches for a feast. Enkidu, wild Enkidu, who had once run with the gazelles, took the bull's right thigh and flung it into Inanna's face, shouting his contempt at the goddess who had tried to destroy his brother. That night Enkidu dreamed. He dreamed the gods assembled in council. He dreamed them speaking his name. He dreamed them saying, "One of them must die for what they have done." Gilgamesh is 2 parts divine, but Enkidu is only clay and spit and animal fury. Let the wild thing return to dust. He woke with fever burning in his blood. For 12 days he lay dying while Gilgamesh held his hand and wept and raged and bargained with gods who would not listen. Enkidu, who had learned the language of men, used his last breaths to curse the door they had made from Humbaba's cedar. He cursed the hunter who had found him. He cursed Shamhat, who had civilized him. He cursed the day he reached for bread and lost the language of gazelles. But then, at the end, he took it back. He blessed Shamhat instead, for she had given him Gilgamesh. He blessed the hunter, for without him, Enkidu would never have known brotherhood. He blessed even the cedar door, for it had been cut in glory shared with the one person he had loved. Better to have been human and to die, he whispered, than to have run forever in the grass, alone and changeless and knowing nothing. When Enkidu died, Gilgamesh cut his hair and tore his fine robes and wandered into the desert like a beast, trying to run from death itself. But that is another story. This one ends here, with the truth Enkidu learned too late and bought with his only life. That transformation is always sacrifice, that to love is to become mortal, that the gods can shape us from clay, but only we can choose what shape our hearts will take before we return to dust. The wild man learned to weep, and in weeping became fully human at last.